Tattletale. One day, Rebecca was at Vickerstown with her usual commuter train. As she was letting her passengers off, she saw a familiar black diesel pull into the other platform with a goods train. "Afternoon, Diesel," she smiled. "Yeah," came the reply. "Something the matter?" asked Rebecca. Diesel muttered again, clearly not interested in the conversation. "Well, if you ever want to talk, I'm all ears," comforted Rebecca. "Just leave me alone, banana," retorted Diesel. "Well, if that's what you want," replied Rebecca. Frustrated by Rebecca's constant talking, Diesel bumped his trucks hard, spilling his load everywhere and nearly hitting some passengers. "Diesel!" cried Rebecca. "What did you do that for?" So as to not get in trouble, Diesel quickly thought of a plan. "It wasn't me. Those trucks must have bumped me. Very silly things they are." "But I just saw you bump them," replied Rebecca, confused. "Well, maybe you saw wrong," sneered Diesel. "Maybe you need glasses like with." "My eyes are fine, Diesel. I very clearly saw—" "Listen, Rebecca," Diesel said firmly. "You're going to say the trucks bumped me, or you're going to be very sorry you didn't. Unless you want to be a silly goody-goody tattletale." "Oh, no, Diesel," shuddered Rebecca. "There's a good engine," oiled Diesel, and he rolled away, leaving behind a hushed Rebecca. Later that day, Rebecca was in Knapford Yard just finishing a match and a drink. She saw Diesel shunting a train on the track next to her. "Hello again, Diesel," she said, slightly hesitant. Diesel didn't answer. He just rolled sulkily away with his train. No sooner had he crossed over the points in front of Rebecca that one of the truck's brakes slipped on. "Grrr!" growled Diesel. "What's the matter with you silly trucks now?" He tried pushing them with all his might, but to no avail. "Have you tried checking the brakes?" asked Rebecca thoughtfully. Diesel's guard went to do just that, but Diesel was more reluctant. "Be quiet, you silly slug!" he retorted. "I've shunted trucks for much longer than you've been built, so I think I know what I'm doing." Rebecca thought back to earlier at Vickerstown and was about to comment on the accident there. But then she remembered what Diesel had said, and out of fear, said nothing. Then, Diesel's guard slipped the brakes off of one of the trucks, but Diesel couldn't help giving his trucks one last bump, as he crashed right into Rebecca, derailing his train in the process. "Ow!" she cried. "Diesel, what was that for?" "What do you mean? You weren't watching where you were going and you bumped right into me." "What?" asked Rebecca, flabbergasted. "Diesel, you clearly bumped into me." "Let's try this again, Rebecca," said Diesel, sounding rather sinister. "You weren't looking where you were going, and you crashed right into my train. I didn't do anything. Unless you want to be a tattletale and get what's coming to you, of course." Rebecca stayed silent. "That's what I thought," smirked Diesel, and he hurried away to fetch a crane just as Stanley arrived. "Rebecca!" he cried. "What's happened here?" I guess I wasn't paying attention and bumped into the back of Diesel's goods train." "This won't do at all," sighed Stanley. "Now the track's blocked, so no one can get through. We'll need to clear this up quick." Just then, Diesel returned with a crane. "Wow, Diesel," said Stanley. "That was quick." "Well, I knew I had to do something when silly Rebecca here crashed into my train," said Diesel boldly. "Just making sure trains get through is all." Rebecca just sat there in silence. Later that day, the Fat Controller came to speak to Rebecca in the sheds.
"What's happened to you this afternoon, Rebecca? You're usually very careful when you go about the yard."
I guess I just got distracted, sir," Rebecca stammered feebly.
"Well, just pay closer attention next time,"
smiled the Fat Controller, and walked away. James, who was the only other engine in the sheds and in the berth nearby, looked closely at Rebecca. He knew Rebecca well, and it didn't seem like her to get distracted. Are you sure that's why you crashed? He asked Rebecca. That doesn't sound right to me. Well, that's what happened, James, said Rebecca, sounding rather defensive. I was distracted and didn't see Diesel's train in front of me. That's all there is to it. If you say so, said James slowly. But all the same, something didn't seem quite right. The next evening, Rebecca was in Knapford Yard filling up on coal after the end of another busy day. The day's work was done, and the shunting engines were tidying up the yard for the night. As Rebecca sat under the hopper, a familiar black shape loomed behind her, snickering to itself. Then, when no one was looking, it lunged out, bumping Rebecca violently and dropping a pile of coal onto the tracks in the process. Diesel! Shrieked Rebecca, almost sounding terrified. Did you miss me? He said slimily. How foolish of you to rush out from under the hopper like that, Rebecca. But what else would I expect from the engine who bumped into my trucks yesterday? That wasn't me, Diesel! Cried Rebecca. Tattletale! Rebecca fell silent. Just then, Stafford rolled up. Oh dear! What's happened here? Rebecca shivered as she felt Diesel give her the evil eye from behind. I was too excited to get back to the sheds and didn't wait until I had finished filling up, Rebecca said quietly. Well, this won't do at all, sighed Stafford. Now we'll have to clear up the tracks for the other engines. Rebecca didn't say anything. She just puffed sadly to the sheds as Diesel sneered to himself. When Rebecca arrived back at the sheds, James was the first to notice the downcast expression on her face. Rebecca? He asked, concerned. What's the matter? Just tired, James, said Rebecca weakly, before rolling into the back of the sheds without another word. This made James more concerned than ever, and he decided to talk to Edward about it the next morning. Oh dear, said Edward. Rebecca's not the sort of engine to be upset without a good reason. That's just it, Edward, replied James. I don't know what that reason is. Perhaps we should try and talk to her tonight in the sheds, suggested Edward. I'm sure a good talk will help us figure out what the problem is. I hope so, Edward, sighed James as he headed off with his passenger train, feeling more worried for Rebecca than ever. That evening, Rebecca was back at Knapford Yard again, filling up on water before going back to the sheds. But Rebecca wasn't enjoying her drink. She hadn't enjoyed anything all day. She was too worried about running into Diesel to even smile. Rebecca kept nervously darting her eyes across the yard, trying to spot Diesel before he could bump her. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a black box hiding in the far siding of the yard. Oh no, 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 panicked Rebecca. Diesel then began racing at full speed towards a helpless Rebecca, his laughter getting louder and louder. Please, no, pleaded Rebecca. No, Diesel, not again! But Diesel didn't stop. He bumped into Rebecca violently, forcing her into the buffers. Rebecca felt as though her buffers would fall off. Diesel, please, stop doing this! Just leave me be! She was almost in tears. You listen here, Rebecca, said Diesel firmly. I do what I want, when I want, and you can't tell me what to do. Understand, Tattletale? Yes, I understand, Diesel, whimpered Rebecca. There's a good engine, sneered Diesel. Now, what's happened here? Rebecca said nothing. Exactly. And with that, Diesel oiled away, leaving Rebecca feeling more depressed than ever. Rebecca slunk sadly into Tidmouth Sheds, where James and Edward were waiting. Hello, Rebecca, smiled Edward. How are you feeling? Fine, Edward, mumbled Rebecca. You don't sound fine to me, replied James. What do you know, James? Retorted Rebecca. Rebecca, Over this past week, you've been miserable and haven't spoken to anyone, explained James. You've never been like this, and it's been worrying me since it started. Rebecca, we just want to try and help you, comforted Edward. If you tell us what the problem is, I'm sure we can help you with whatever it is. Please, Rebecca, begged James. What's the matter? Silence fell over the sheds, and then Rebecca began to cry. It's Diesel, she said between tears. What did he do? Asked James, his eyes now filled with anger. He's been bumping me continuously for the past few days, sobbed Rebecca. For James, that was all he needed to hear. He steamed furiously out of the sheds. James, where are you going? Called Edward. To find that Diesel and give him what he deserves, said James through gritted teeth, and headed off to do just that. No, James, don't! Cried Rebecca, but James was already too far away to hear. No point in trying to stop him, sighed Edward. I just hope he'll be all right. Now, Rebecca, please continue. And Rebecca told Edward everything. By the time she had finished, even Edward felt furious. Of all them no good. Regardless, my driver's calling the Fat Controller right now, and I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel better. Rebecca looked out into the distance. Could you please stay awake with me to make sure Diesel doesn't come and that James comes back safe? Of course, Rebecca, smiled Edward, and continued to console Rebecca as they waited for James to come back. James did come back a few hours later, when all the other engines had fallen asleep. James? What happened? Asked Rebecca as James backed down into the berth next to her. Don't worry, Rebecca, said James stolidly. You won't have to worry about Diesel coming near you again. James, what did you do? Railed Edward. Don't worry about it, Edward, replied James. The Fat Controller's been told. He knows all about it. As the three engines stayed up late into the night, Rebecca looked over at James. Thank you, James, whispered Rebecca. You're welcome, Rebecca, replied James, before sadly adding, I'm sorry it ever got this bad. The next morning, the Fat Controller came to see Rebecca.
Good morning, Rebecca,
said much more solemnly than usual. Hello, sir, replied Rebecca.
Edward's driver and James told me all about what happened this past week, and I've made sure Diesel won't be leaving his shed for a long time.
Thank you, sir, said Rebecca.
But whenever an engine behaves rudely to you, it's very important that you tell me right away, so that I can stop it straight away. Otherwise, it gets rather out of control and makes the situation worse for you.
Yes, sir, whispered Rebecca quietly.
And James, said the Fat Controller, turning to the red engine, while I understand your actions last night, I do not approve my engines causing damage to each other. You should have come to me before doing anything else.
But, sir, said James, before quietly subsiding after seeing the stern look on the Fat Controller's face. Yes, sir, he replied begrudgingly.
Very well,
said the Fat Controller.
Now, Rebecca, I want you to stay in the sheds for today. At least one day's rest should do you good. James will take your trains until you're feeling better.
Yes, sir, said Rebecca, and the Fat Controller left. Are you sure you'll be all right for today, Rebecca? Asked James. I'm sure I'll be fine, replied Rebecca. Well, if you need help, I'll be back throughout the day to talk, said James, and he reluctantly left to collect Rebecca's tray. As he left, Rebecca looked over at Edward. Why does Diesel have to be so horrid? Is there even any good in him at all? She asked. There's good in everyone, Rebecca, replied Edward. It's just harder to see in some than others. Maybe he'll apologize one day. He's done it to others before, after all. When? I'll tell you another day. Well, I'm not going to forgive him, Edward, replied Rebecca quietly. Not yet, anyway. Well, I'll be back around noon, said Edward as he left the shed in an attempt to change the subject. Perhaps we'll talk again then. Sure, Edward, said Rebecca. And for the first time in days, Rebecca gave a weak smile to the old angel. Although it would take a while to heal from what Diesel had done, she was lucky to have friends to help her all the way through. And Rebecca couldn't ask for anything more. Sorry, Connor.